So Season 11 has been the best season of Diablo 4 yet, and I think with the new sanctification system, people are going to be playing this season longer than they have previous seasons just because of the chance of getting those crazy high rolls with being able to just get mythic powers on any other item in the game. So with it being the case, I think people are going to be playing this season for longer. One of the really big questions is how do you continue to level up effectively once you get to like 250 plus Paragon levels. And it seems that with Season 11, the main leveling method when you're that deep into the end game has actually changed to something completely different than it has been in the past. So in this video, I want to go over the best ways to level, how to do it more efficiently, and how to get even more experience from this. And this method is actually really simple. If you've been playing a lot of the season, you've probably already noticed it, and that is boss kills from any of the bosses on the boss ladder except for Belial, because defeating any of these bosses gives you a ridiculous amount of experience. And on top of that, the pit experience has been nerfed from previous seasons. Usually you would just be running the pit because doing higher and higher pit runs, you would get more experience, and more specifically, the completion bonus at the end of the pits would give you a ridiculous amount of experience. But it seems that that completion bonus at the end of pit runs has been removed, and experience from the boss ladder has been massively increased. So you're not running pits for experience anymore, you're just running the boss ladder. And again, it seems to be every boss except Belial for some reason. That's completely fine because Belial is the boss you can do the least of by far anyway. So any other boss in the boss ladder seems to be giving around the same amount of experience, all things considered. So it kind of boils down to whatever boss ladder materials you have, you go and farm that boss. Once you run out, you go and farm another boss. And even though it is just faster to go and farm bosses that you have the materials of, so you can open up the chest and then resummon the boss much more quickly, you actually don't have to have any boss materials to get the experience. Just defeating the boss is what gives you that experience. So what you could actually do is defeat the boss, leave the dungeon, and then reset it and go back in and do it again. But that is significantly slower than just getting the boss summoning materials, because if you don't open the chest, you can't resummon the boss. So what I would generally recommend is just to go to the boss you have materials for. If you run out of all boss summoning materials, you'll want to go farm more. That'll just be significantly more efficient than trying to like reset the dungeon after every kill. And if you're not running like a top tier meta build, I would actually recommend you change up your build a little bit, at least change up things that are easy to change, like change up your unique class mechanic, change up what potions or even incenses you're using, maybe change up some of your skill points. Maybe if you have some easy gear swaps you can do for better single target damage or anything like that, I'd recommend doing that. The faster you can kill the bosses, the more experience you're going to get. So you can pretty heavily optimize these fights as well, and just how fast you're defeating the bosses. And on top of just increasing your efficiency of defeating the actual bosses, you can actually increase the experience gains through all of the different methods we have, which actually makes this farm even better, because if you go to something like pits in previous seasons, that big chunk of experience you got for the completion at the end, I don't think would actually be affected by increases to experience. So what you're going to want to always have active when you're doing these boss farms for experience is you want your magic elixir active, that's going to be 8% increased experience. You want any incense active, that's going to be another 5%. Also keep in mind, even though you can use and stack 3 different incenses for the stat increases, the experience increase does not stack. So if you have 3 incenses active, it'll still only be 5%. But on top of that, I would recommend to go get a Nightmare Sigil with the Forgotten Wisdom Nightmare affix on it. And once you go into this Nightmare dungeon, any enemy you kill can drop those experience globes, but the main thing we care about is somewhere within that dungeon, there will be an experience well that gives you quite a long buff. I think it's 1 hour of increased experience, and this is another 15% increase to your experience. And all of these experience increases should stack and should work on any of these bosses you're defeating, which when you have all of these experience boosters active, you should be getting around 5 million experience per boss kill. And that's pretty much everything you need to know to farm these bosses in the most efficient way possible, but that also begs the question, how do you keep up the boss summoning materials? Because if the most efficient way is to keep opening the chests, you'll run out of materials pretty quickly. And there is a handful of ways to get a lot of boss summoning materials this season. You have every other way we had in previous seasons. You can go do Hell Tides and open up all the chests. You can face Duriel in the Hell Tides. You can go do the Undercity and use the Tribute of Titans. It gives you a bunch of boss summoning materials. This is actually still really good if you really run out of boss summoning materials. You can even go Goblin farm while the Goblin event is active right now, so you can either go run in the open world and run around and hunt goblins that way, or you can hunt for Nightmare Sigils with the Treasure Breach affix on them. That'll give you dozens of potential goblins in there. A good chunk of the goblins do have a chance to drop boss summoning materials. Then if you get the goblin that splits into smaller goblins a handful of times, all of those ones will drop a good chunk of boss summoning materials. But then you have the absolute best way, which primarily comes from one of the essences, the Essence of Hellfire, which you can rank up to rank 5 to get a lot more boss summoning mats. But this reads that survive world boss encounters to earn exalted layer keys. The weekly cache awards layer keys, and more layer keys drop across Sanctuary. Now the exalted layer keys should only be Belial keys, so that one's not super important, but the weekly cache from world bosses will give you a bunch, and then you just get more layer keys across doing pretty much any content. And a really good place to get these is to go summon the seasonal version of Asmodean and open up one of the 3 chests. So either using Duriel materials, Belial materials, or Andariel materials, because anytime you open up those chests, they have a pretty good chance of giving you a bunch of boss summoning materials. And one of the kind of loot options you can get out of those chests is just a ton of boss summoning mats. So if you already have a bunch of boss summoning mats, you can have a good rotation of going and using up all your boss summoning mats, getting ridiculous amounts of experience, but also getting the seasonal items you need to go open the chest at Asmodean, open up a bunch of those chests, get a bunch of boss summoning mats back, and then go back and do the boss summoning fights. Now also keep in mind, from Duriel, Andariel, and Belial, when you're doing those as your bosses in the boss ladder, you can only stack up 20 of the seasonal powers to open up the chests at Asmodean. So whenever you get to that level of the boss summoning ladder, make sure to just get to the 20 material, then go to the other 2 bosses. So do Andariel, Belial if you can, and Duriel. Once you have all of those seasonal items maxed out at 20, go to the Asmodean fight and use them all up. You don't want to just keep doing those bosses when you can't get their parts to open up the chest anymore. So keep that in mind. You will have to kind of go back and forth when you get to that point. All of the other bosses in the boss ladder, you can just do as much as you want and you don't really have to worry about it. But that's pretty much all you're going to be doing for the best experience farm in Season 11. Make sure to keep all your experience buffs stacked up while you're doing the fights, and then use some of the methods I went over to continue to get the boss summoning materials. This will get you experience ridiculously fast. I think this may even be faster than you could get your Paragon levels in previous seasons. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.